2025, we're back. The bottom line. What's up, Taylor?
I miss you, Cody. We don't talk enough.
How's your Q4?
Oh,
All right, let's jump in. None of this nonsense. We are here for facts to address myths. That's a lot of, but we're going to go through the cost control myth series. So this is episode 1. If you haven't heard of cost controls, you obviously are not on D2C Twitter or been living under a rock. But neither here nor there. We're going to be going through those 3 different types of cost controls. We're big believers in cost caps. Maybe others out there, like in Andrew Ferris, if you listen to his podcast, which you probably do if you listen to this one. He is very much a fan of bid caps. Or if you heard my partner in crime, Taylor, on his podcast, they talked about that a little bit. But to set the stage here, we're going to be going through cost controls, purpose of the cost controls, but address the main objections, but also, I guess, myths out there around cost controls just in general in terms of a media buying philosophy. That's will always be something that we talk against just because 100% of our accounts, like you've said time and time again, Taylor, is run on cost controls. So I'll jump in here. Types of cost controls. Bid cap. Do you want to give the audience a definition of bid cap, and then I'll take the final 2, Taylor? How about that? You go 1, I'll go 2.
Yeah, you got it. And just to preface it a little bit further too, if you're using one of these 3, kudos to you. You're 99% of the way there. Like that's the 80-20, or I wouldn't even say 80-20. It's like 99-1. If you're using one of these and you're using it across your entire account, that's great. We're kind of getting into the semantics now in the weeds per se. I would say this is more edge case, more margins on the margins. And that's just something to call out. Like if you're using cost controls, one of these 3, kudos to you. If you wanted to debate which one's best for your account, I would say this is on the margins, but it's still good to understand the difference between the 3. So bid cap, to answer your question now, with that in mind, bid cap is the strictest cost control that you can potentially use. So if you just think about cost controls, right, you're setting a target CPA or target ROAS in the ad account that you want to hit. That ultimately levels up to your new customer acquisition goals, or if you're using it for returning customers as well, ultimately up to your overall MER goal. So let's just say we have a 1 ROAS goal, or if we have a $50 CPA goal. If we use a bid cap, we're going to plug in $50. And what that's saying is basically you're going to have a hard line if you're looking at a graph at the $50 mark, and purchases are only going to come at that line or below that line. So you're telling Facebook, hey, this is a strict cap. That's what it is. It's a ceiling where, hey, we can only afford to, acquire customers at $50. And so we need you to go acquire customers at or below that ceiling. And so that's what it will do. That's a key difference between this type of cost control versus others. It's the strictest one, which can have its disadvantages, which is on the margins. I don't know if you want to go into that, but Cody, would you piggyback off of that or add anything there?
No, I mean, yeah, we'll try to keep the main thing. Obviously, there's a natural question of when to use bid caps or cost caps, why we use cost caps. I would just reference prior episodes where we talk about that. Unless you have a quick reminder statement, if you wanted to address that real quick. I guess go into number 2, cost caps. The difference there is it's not as a hard line because we're maintaining an average cost per conversion, and that's what it's focusing on versus a maximum cost per conversion, which is what bid cap would do.
Right. And then, this kind of gets into why do I like, cost per result goal, which is like cost caps is what we're saying that's synonymous with
the technical name.
Yeah. It's like kind of the middle ground for people, I would say, because a lot of the feedback on cost controls is like, it doesn't allow us to get any spend, it's like the con that people say, and we'll get into that and, down the line in this episode, but it allows for a certain level of delivery, right? It gives you a greater chance at getting some level of delivery to get a little bit more data than you might otherwise not be able to, which could be seen as the potential con of a bid cap, right? It restricts spend really, really strictly. So cost per result goal is an average, which allows, again, if you have that $50 line, purchases just come above that line, below that line. Overall, though, the average ends up at that line. So it allows a little bit more opportunity for delivery to get data, get an optimization, all those things.
And then last one, min ROAS, return on ad spend, sets a minimum return expected on ad spend. So it means $2 of revenue for every dollar spent goal that you'd have. So those are the three.
Yeah. And then just time and place for minimum ROAS. It's kind of like if you're driving to a collection page with a bunch of different AOVs, right? Different financial outcomes, and you don't know what the AOV is going to ultimately be, and it's pretty volatile. You set a minimum ROAS at that point, right? Because if you set a certain CPA goal, it's just going to go after the lowest hanging fruit, the lowest hanging AOV. But that's when you would ultimately plug in a minimum ROAS there.
So the purpose, as if you haven't heard us talk about this, but acts as a governor or a safeguard, preventing wasteful ad spend. So it only allows Facebook to spend within set performance parameters, which we are big goal oriented, very much into the weeds of the unit economics of each offer, SKU, making sure that it levels up to your AMER, all that stuff. We've talked about that in our forecasting series. We'll continue to talk about that. All right, let's just jump into the main myth, which you already hinted at and we talked about, which is my budget isn't spending or cost controls don't allow us to spend. I mean, definitely one of the most common questions that I get in the sales cycles is that it's not going to fully spend. I'm trying it, and we can get into some of the weeds of that when they're quote unquote trying it. But yeah, how would you address this? Just let's just open up the conversation. My budget isn't spending. What would you just say?
You're welcome.
Yep, I knew that was coming.
Not to be arrogant. I mean, that could come off arrogant. I would never say that to a client, but that's generally, if I'm being honest, that's how I feel. Like, you're welcome. Like, would I rather you spend $1 million and then learn that mistake the hard way, or would you rather me not have you spend any money and you learn that there's something off? Right? Which one would you take? You would take the one where you don't have to spend any money, and I tell you, like, hey, something's not right here. It's a signal. We got to go figure some things out. That's the advantage of cost controls. You don't need to spend anything to figure out that there's something wrong. Now, if you spend nothing, obviously you're negatively leveraged against the OpEx that your fixed costs that are spending every single month. So, regardless, but you'll spend a minimum amount. We'll have to adjust our targets to get that minimum amount to offset that negative leverage against your OpEx. But ultimately, at the core of this is you don't need to invest anything. You don't need to burn anything to understand that there's something wrong with your business.
So you're saying it's a feature, not a bug?
It is a feature, not a bug. Exactly right. Long story short.
Yeah, I would say, I think you bring up the main point, which is it puts the onus back on you, the operator, to actually figure some stuff out versus blaming the platform or blaming the platform for performance. Because that is traditional media buying, right? It's kind of like the stock market. It goes up and down. Performance goes up and down. My budget is X. I'm just going to spend it. Traditional media buying has operated that way, and people still, obviously, like, cost controls is definitely the minority, although growing. But so hence why we have to do a series like this, because the onus is continuously on us to prove that it's a worthwhile endeavor to switch your media buying strategy on Meta specifically, or even just across the board, into cost control. There's something interesting too about, the other end of this, though, is obviously something inherent to the challenge of naming it a cost control. Obviously, is like a downside protection of the name, right? Like, you're controlling costs, keep the downside low. But what we've seen, and we can riff on this all day long, is that it's often there's more upside, which is, we're not just a fan of the downside. Of course, that's freeing, but there's often more upside in actually media buying this way. Like, especially when we pair it with our creative arsenal and the volume by which we can launch creative, obviously, is a unique advantage of our agency. But just by and large, we've seen more volume go out considerably compared to doing something on highest volume. And that is, I just want to address that, because obviously cost control, everybody thinks about controlling cost because of just the way that it's called, the naming convention of what a cost control is.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's always the biggest thing. I wasn't able to get spend. Right, that's what you always hear. I tried it, wasn't able to get spend. We can talk about the hybrid model and why that doesn't work too, and that's probably
Well, yeah, bring that up. Bring that up. Why that doesn't work.
okay. Well, people will say, I tried cost caps and I wasn't able to get any delivery on it. And so my initial question always is, or our initial question always is, well, did you run it alongside your highest volume campaigns, and was it within a hybrid model? Because if it's alongside highest volume campaigns, like the highest volume campaigns have a set budget that you're communicating to it that it needs to spend that day, regardless of performance. So that's going to get first servings in the auction. That delivery is going to go out first, and then your cost caps are going to have the opportunity to enter into the auction after that guaranteed budget is spent on the highest volume campaigns. So now the cost control campaigns are getting second servings into the auction after all of your deliveries out on the highest volume campaigns, and it's only going to get any delivery if there's anything left over for to sweep up at the sloppy seconds, with the sloppy seconds there. And so it's not a fair assessment at all. It's getting, it's not likely for that to get any delivery. And if you're comparing it apples to apples on what performed better, highest volume or cost controls, it's a completely unfair comparison as well. And so if that's not happening though, and you did give cost controls a full swing, if you're not getting delivery, again, I go back to the initial statement of, kind of, you're welcome, right? Like, would you rather spend $1 million to figure out the error, or would you rather spend nothing? And then it comes down to like, okay, let's get more creative in there. And that's why we're really bullish on creative here at Kinship, right? It gets a ton of opportunities to get spend against your cost control. What happens if you still don't get delivery? Okay, could it be an offer? Okay, if you're still not able to get delivery, am I trying to achieve too high of an AMER or a ROAS? Like it's such a great signal to go off of to make decisions though.
Yeah, and that's where the feedback is valuable. I think instead of trying to solve a creative and offer problem with a media buying solution, which is what people are doing when they're not pointing the flashlight back on themselves, you need to focus on improving the quality of your creative to meet those targets. Like if Facebook isn't spending your budget, it's because the creative isn't performing well enough. To your point, you're welcome, right? Like you're welcome for this feedback that the machine is giving you. And so take that, learn, optimize. And that's where it's like, okay, I need to improve then. If I'm not spending, I need to improve. So you talked about the hybrid model. So naturally a question that pops up too is like, so that means, Taylor, that I need to, if I'm going to give this the best shot, I need to switch my entire media buying. Like I need to switch entirely my account structure from highest volume into a cost control media buying structure.
100%. And it's really not that scary, guys. It's really not. Just look at what current CPA you're hitting. At the end of the day, this is also worth mentioning. Like if across all these bids, across every like highest volume, cost control, bid cap, minimum ROAS, cost per result goal, if a piece of creative is going to win, it'll ultimately end up at a similar level of performance. I do think we can get more spend behind it within a cost control environment. We'll talk about that, but it's worth mentioning. Like the winners are going to end up being winners, and they're going to end up at a similar ROAS. The losers, though, this is where the difference is. The losers will spend in highest volume, and the losers will not spend in the cost control environment,
or very little.
Yeah, and so like if you have a highest volume setup currently, and if you transition, you have your current CPA that you have. Let's say you're hitting a $50 CPA within a highest volume. Just go set it up as cost controls and set the cost control at 50. You're going to get delivery, and you're going to find yourself get more efficient because you're not going to spend on the losers anymore. You're going to spend on the winners. And so you're going to ultimately see that cost per result goal at 50 can come down, and you're going to ultimately be able to get more delivery out against it. And so it's really not that scary. Where people get in trouble is they're currently hitting a $50 cost per result goal in the ad account, and then they say, but I need to be hitting at 35, and they go set their cost caps at 35, and then they don't get any delivery. It's like, no wonder you're not getting delivery. You're hitting a 50. Why do you expect you're ultimately going to get a 35 overnight just because you put it into the system and you made a wish? This isn't Make-A-Wish Foundation.
That's also goes into why you need to forecast based in reality versus just like, this is what I want to hit, or this is what I used to hit. Or not even understanding or taking into consideration LTV to CAC and all these different things of the repeat revenue, because they're set artificially high targets without considering, your true minimum acceptable ROAS or CPA. So to your point, like if you prefer spending more at a slightly lower efficiency, you just set your cost control higher. to make sure that you're getting still, like adjusting for the spending needs that you have, which is probably, we probably could have done a whole separate episode about this. Is like a myth is that you need to switch. You do need to switch your entire structure over, but the myth out there is that you'll have huge volume loss when you switch it over.
The only edge case here, guys, is like, again, if you're hitting a $50 cost per result goal in your ad account currently, and if you switch it to, if you're at a highest volume campaign, you switch it to cost per result goal and you set it at 50 because that's what you're currently hitting. Maybe you struggle to get a little bit of spend because, again, your highest volume campaigns were in optimization. They had social proof. There was much data. So temporarily just lift those cost controls up to like $10. But once you get more delivery there and once it gets some spend, you aggregate data, get some optimization. Again, this is edge case too. I would start it at 50. And if you're not able to get any delivery, lift it up 10% up to 55. After that, though, again, you're going to cut all the spend behind the losers and it's going to allocate all the budget to the winners, where you will inevitably get more efficient with that spend. And again, we haven't even touched on how this like really scales in peak moments and pulls itself back to even get more efficient with the ad spend and get more delivery. And that's a whole nother piece of this that makes it extremely advantageous to do.
I love how you're just making my transitions even easier by just already mentioning them yourself. So why don't you take that transition and go bring up the examples that we had in mind coming in?
Yeah, I'll just start with an easy one. I feel like that is applicable to almost all brands. Weekdays versus weekends. Almost all brands experience this. Weekends tend to be the most efficient, right? And we can hypothesize why that is. People are on their phone more, have more time. They do their buying on Sundays or Saturdays, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. But across, we've had visibility in over $300 million of ad spend. We have seen that weekends tend to outperform weekdays. So within a traditional setup of highest volume, for you to take advantage of that, what do you need to do? You're basically manually adjusting budgets for the weekend. So it makes a higher adjustment. And then on Mondays, you're making another adjustment to pull back budgets. Like you're doing a lot of manual adjustments. And with machine learning systems, right, less adjustments is better. You want the machine learning system to optimize at a certain clip and aggregate more data at a certain clip, or less is more, right? So within a cost control setting, we have all cost caps set up with an inflated budget. So what I mean by that is if, you're set to spend $1 million this month, we'll easily set budgets to spend, 10 million to 50 million, right? It's not actually going to spend that, but it'll only spend it if it's there, if the performance is there. So basically, when its performance is not there, say on a Monday or a Tuesday, this is one of your worst days of the week, it's going to automatically throttle spend back on its own as a machine learning system. No human manual, intervention or adjustments need to be made. And then on the weekend, when performance is there, it will spike spend. So your spend will level down and level up when performance is there versus any sort of human intervention and adjustments that ultimately impacts optimization.
There's a problem today with too much fake UGC saturation. Consumers are looking for authentic reviews and content, and this is a way that you can stand out in your crowded market with authentic influencer content. So Cody here with an ad read for Get Cyril. So there's an explosion of D2C brands across categories. You got to be able to stick out. We here at Kinship actually use Cyril for influencer discovery, but Cyril is not just a discovery tool, but a way that you can search for brand aligned influencers, but reach out directly. You can manage them all in place. You can track performance all within one platform. So brands like Avi, Legends, Tab Chocolate are using them to get hundreds of creators talking about them on socials, and you can too. And in addition to that, all of our clients here at Kinship that are doing seeding are using that platform as well. So you can start your free 7-day trial with Cyril to get authentic UGC. Go check them out. I think this is getting at, which is probably one of the biggest things that I think we talked about with when we had Andrew actually on our podcast, Andrew Ferris on our podcast. We talked about like sunk cost fallacy when it comes to launching creative and forcing spend behind it because I've invested in this creative and so I need to see it spend. And so cost capture restricting spend, it's not giving the opportunity, which is actually another myth that we could talk about too, is just how to offset some of those things and what we do with that. But humans struggle with analyzing data objectively, right? Like we overreact to small data samples. We allow personal bias to influence decisions. We misinterpret statistical significance. And this is why we want to lean into Facebook. The algorithm is going to process way more data without bias. It's going to predict ad performance based on historical data and real-time learning and all these different things. And this is where it's like a media buyer might turn off an ad prematurely based on intuition or some arbitrary number of creative testing, right? Like this is a huge one, while the algorithm identifies it as a potential winner. So like this whole, thought process around doesn't get any spend, adjusting budgets for, daily active users, what you're saying about like from Monday to Wednesday to Saturday to Sunday, like the manual aspect of being able to adjust that, and do that smartly and nail that 100%. Like, is Facebook perfect? No one's saying that. Like, no one's saying that they're 100% perfect. Obviously, like we've had bugs, but people complain about the bugs because they have such high expectations about the platform itself. And so is it going to be 100% proof? No. Our cost control is 100% proof? No. But so there's going to be like random bugs out there? Yes. But is it better than you? Emphatically yes, right? Like, and that's the point, right? Is like, now, like this is another future episode that we want to do too, is just talk about like the day-to-day management of cost controls, because I think that people significantly undervalue what media buyers are doing, and something that we address, which is like, do you just launch a bunch of creative and kind of set it and forget it? And like, I won't go down that rabbit hole yet, but we could talk about that at length. But yeah, the human error is huge when it comes to this side of things.
Yeah, and why even try to outsmart? It's the most sophisticated machine learning system and ad platform in the world. Why try to outsmart it? Because that's what you're saying. Every time if you're on highest volume, and again, going back to this example of a week, if you're increasing the budgets manually and decreasing the budget manually on a weekly basis, and that's best case. Like if you're running highest volume and you just have it set at $2,000 per day, like that's a terrible way to go about this too. Like that's even worse. And I would imagine that's what majority of people are doing, because now you're spending the same amount on the worst days as you're spending on the best days. And like you're missing out on so much margin there if you're doing that. And I would argue that's what probably most people are doing. So I'm glad that got addressed. But in this scenario where you are making manual adjustments on a highest volume campaign, where you are going off your best educated guess of when you think performance is there and when it's not there, you're betting on yourself to outsmart Meta multiple times every week. What? Like that just sounds wild, and it's just not, and you just don't need to, right? You can lean into Meta without making a single adjustment here, assuming your cost per result goal is set up in a place that levels up to your AMR properly, and it will spend and throttle when it's there. It will pull back when it's not there, leading to a far more efficient outcome on top line revenue, as well as overall profitability for your business.
I use the example in the sales cycle with people is that imagine a mall on like a Wednesday morning versus a Sunday afternoon. Like that, just the foot traffic, the amount of people that are looking to buy things is just very, very different. Why would I spend the same amount of money on those 2 days equally? And that's what you're doing when you have a daily budget methodology.
Bro, I'm stealing that. That's fire. I haven't heard you say that.
You're not on my sales calls, bro.
Yeah, nice. That's cool. I support that.
Well, so let's transition into that client that we had in mind, as far as like, I mean, to bring up a client example of like, hey, they were spending the same daily budget and then we switched them to cost controls and look, we proved that we could get more volume out, and it didn't restrict spend. I mean, that's literally everyone that we onboard. But in terms of, you had a specific case study in mind or example of a brand recently where we kind of talked about like,
I don't know. I mean, it could be a case study to be determined. We'll see. We're 3 days into the month, but it just speaks to, what we're talking about with cost controls, and hey, it scales when it's there, it pulls back when it's not. So for this brand in particular, health and wellness brand, so December, not the best month, but the whole time we were just talking about, hey, we're setting up a cost control in this month to hit a certain level of spend that offsets, because in the month of December, right, for a health and wellness brand, spend will be minimal. It'll be lower. It's not peak moment. It's comfort food season. People are not thinking about their new year, new me bodies quite yet. They're thinking about what's for Christmas dinner. And so in that month, right, it could be the fear of like, is cost control is going to allow us to spend? Yes, 100% they will. And it's not spending wisely. That's the wise move. Again, we're going to spend a certain amount regardless. We'll elevate the cost controls if need be to get a certain amount of delivery out to be, well leveraged against your OPEX and fixed costs. That's a given. Naturally, though, the 25th hits, and we have our account dialed in at the right cost control with significantly inflated budgets on those campaigns to where the 25th hits, pedal to the metal, throttled. So spend immediately 6Xs, 7Xs, 10Xs, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, because that's when it all happens, right? Christmas Day for health and wellness, going to the 26th is really when the floodgates open. And you just see naturally these cost controls and these campaigns with inflated budgets, it just starts scaling, spiking to where Jan 1, we're getting a message like, hey, we got to figure out if we can handle this inventory that's getting out at this point, and so on and so forth. It's just like, we told you, like this is going to happen. And it just, when the seasonality hits outside of the week to week example, this also takes into consideration seasonality, of course. Just when it's there, it'll throttle. When it's not, it'll pull back.
Well, we also, even the other food, health and wellness delivery client that we've had since summer too, like we saw like a downtick in seasonality heading into just even Q4 just at large.
Yeah, for sure.
And how that's already changing with New Year, New You, and as people transition out of and they start thinking about their New Year's resolutions.
Right. But the longer you're on it, right, the more, at the end of the day, these cost controls, and we talked about this a little bit, it's a projected bid, it's imperfect, but that imperfection is always going to be better than my personal bias. But the more that you spend on these cost controls, the more that you lean into it, the better those projected bids get. So don't just do it for a week and throw the baby out with the bathwater either. Like, it's a machine learning system. It needs to aggregate data, give it time, be patient, and you will have better outcomes for your business.
And that's the other thing too, is like, we've talked about this too, is just like we're solving for spend because we're going to hold efficiency at our target. And we're holding Facebook accountable to what is going to be the financially beneficial return for my business, based on my LTV, based on what I need on a first order contribution margin basis, all these different things. Every business model is different. But we're holding Facebook accountable. So how do you solve for spend? And that's where it's like what we talked about with, Facebook giving you feedback and that signal of like, hey, your creative needs to improve, or we need more, or we need more of the same.
Oh, I got another example here. The main thing I'm trying to get at, C-Dub, is like, there are like Pot Gang is a good example where went through, hey, we tried, they had like over 1,000 pieces of creative. It's not the structure. It's not the creative. Now what we're testing at this point is offers and landing pages, and we're starting to see some unlock. But then the next thing, if it doesn't get us to where we need to go, the next thing is, do we even have the right AMER? Is it too high? And this is the conversation we had with Sam today that went really well. And it's like, because then I showed him like, we're targeting a 1.42 because it digs him a hole to begin with. But I showed him like, your business is profitable at a 1. But you dig a deeper hole initially, but long term, we're going to want to work down to this.
Yeah, like, are you willing to bet on that?
Yeah. So I don't know if you think that example is worthwhile, but it's just like it gives you what's going wrong, and then we solve for it. We tried creative first, then we did this, then we're doing this now, and if this still doesn't work, we're doing that next. And it's just like, here's the things in your toolbox to like identify what the problem is and how to go about it.
I love it because it's identifying like what's the alternative. So like you're just forcing spend out.
You're learning a lot of hard lessons,
and you're even more unprofitable.
Right, way more.
So I think because of the forecast, the way that we do it, we're able to project out. Okay, hey, are you willing? Like, this is a conversation that you, the brand operator, need to actually be comfortable with. Like, we can't force this decision on, but this is the numbers. This is like the current trajectory if we change your AMER from a 1.42 to a 1. And this is what it would look like over the next 12 months. But the first, 3 to 6 months look a little hairy. Like, are you willing to make that bet? But we'll just wrap this episode. We'll continue on with our cost control myth series in the next episode. So we'll see you there. Taylor, it's a pleasure.
Sayonara. What?